Welcome, everybody, to this Edge of Mind podcast. My name is Andrew Holacek, and my guest today is John Dupuy, friend and author of quite a remarkable book that we'll be discussing today on integral recovery. And I will start with a formal official introduction, and then we're just going to launch right into a host of, I think, really compelling, provocative topics. So John Dupuy is the founder of Integral Recovery, author of the award-winning book, Integral Recovery, A Revolutionary Approach to the Treatment of Alcoholism and Addiction, and CEO of iAwake Technologies, a company that creates cutting-edge, high-tech brainwave entrainment soundtracks that deepen meditation, support the healing of emotional issues, and enhance mental focus, creativity, and flow states. John is also co-host with Dr. Roger Walsh of the podcast Deep Transformation, Self, Society, Spirit. And I have to interject, I've been a guest on this program. It's the best. These guys are just the best. Dialoguing with cutting-edge thinkers, contemplatives, and activists to explore the great questions of our time. John is passionate about the grit, grind, glory, and grace of daily integral transformative practice, and is also a singer-songwriter with a passion for playing the blues guitar, which is like so awesome. We just connected on that level because I told him I play dead white man's music, and we have that bond as well. So, John, big warm welcome to our little podcast here. I'm super excited to dive into this thing. Thanks for joining us, man.
It's an honor and a pleasure. So let's get rolling here. Wherever the river goes, we'll follow.
I love it. I love it. Well, so let's start with why did you write this book? And I want to say something at the outset. It's like disclaimer. I even though I'm a student of you could say addictive principles, and I think we'll be talking a little bit about that later. I've never been a so-called official formal substance abuser. So I want to be very careful with the disclaimer that some of my comments don't come across as being facile and dismissive of the complex multifactorial nature of this, which in fact is integral to your integral approach to this topic. And so don't be afraid to bust my chops if I say something is like, oh, Andrew, that's just not the way it works, right? But let's start with what inspired you to write this book, because it really is. I was blown away with this thing, John. It's a really remarkable, incredibly comprehensive approach to recovery, and there's so much I want to unpack with you. But let's start with that.
Okay. Well, I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for about 8 or 9 years, and very rich time in my life. I was Fritjof Capra's graduate assistant. And at that time, everybody was buzzing around him. So I was like a fly on the wall for meeting all these great people whose books I'd read and heard about. And I was studying to be a therapist in grad school. And I started working at a treatment center. And it was for adolescents. And that's where I became familiar with the 12 steps and just addiction, listening to stories, going to meetings. I would take my students to meetings and we go there together and hear their stories. And if you haven't been living with your head under a rock or something, you realize that it's a huge, huge problem in our society, our world, our country specifically. And I can't think of any other place where it's not also true. So I really enjoyed the 12 steps because basically I've come from a spiritual orientation. Mm-hmm. I had my first big grace flashbang grenade when I was 11 years old. And it's like, wow. Yeah. This, I was just reading the New Testament. I was raised Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
How come you told me this stuff? Right. And so anyway, that started me on my life, my lifelong quest to find God and to I don't know, be an instrument of the love that I saw and felt coming through that. And the basic revelation was, it's all God and God is love. What? Wow. My poor parents didn't know what to do with me. And anyway, it was quite an interesting story, goes on and on. So I liked the 12 steps a lot because I could see they had really practical value. And basically I saw the 12 steps as something that would be good for everyone, not just addicts or alcoholics. So after a few years in the Bay Area and doing that scene, I visited a friend in southern Utah, and there's a lot of wilderness in my background, but I just fell in love with the red rocks and the canyons and the mountains so much wilderness and so few people. And finally I got my wife. She wasn't my wife then, but we were together then. And we wrapped up all our responsibilities, bought an old 4-wheel drive pickup and clunked across Nevada to Utah, and that became our home. And we were in Moab. We dropped stuff or come and get supplies, but we spent around 6 months just yandering and wandering through the wilderness. And at that time, I did my first vision quest all by my lonesome, just a prayer fast, like, okay, here I am, show me a way to go, because if I don't, I mean, you know me better than me, but I'm just going to be a miserable person unless I find I have some purpose in my life, because I'm not a 7 on the Enneagram. Sorry, all of a sudden, but having fun was not number one thing. So I did. I received a vision, and it was the part of an ongoing journey. Shortly thereafter, we ran into these nascent wilderness programs in southern Utah, where they were taking young people out on extended journeys into the wilderness to, I don't know, to get them away from their, bad scenes, give their families a break, have time to sort themselves out, learn some self-confidence and stick-with-itness, and a new perspective that perhaps there is something more going on that they knew in their lives. And it turned out about at least 80%, if not more, were there because of drug problems. And we didn't handle it very well. We just, here's a 12-step workbook, go sit under that pine tree over there and fill out the paperwork. And then, it's like, I don't even know we did that. That came later, but it was insufficient. So later on, I was given an opportunity to engineer and develop a new program. And I wanted to do it for adults 18 and over who were there because of drugs and alcohol. And I did adults because nobody's really doing it at that time. And I had so many friends that were doing adolescent programs that I thought, well, I don't want to compete with them, and I want to work with adults anyway. So we started that, and we hired an addiction expert, and he blew his knee out like on the second day. And pretty soon I found myself as being the expert on addiction, and I'm not an addict. Okay. I have suffered from depression at a depth that is life-threatening. My older brother committed suicide. So this is not just having a bad day, but for those of you out there who know what that kind of depression is, death seems like a really good thing. It's a break from this. If it's not this, anything that's not this is good. And that's why people can do that without fear. They're so overwhelmed by the suffering. They just want to go. And after my brother died, I actually went into the same sort of depression that he had and really learned it. So my students, they could get that I knew what I was talking about. And why? Because I'd listened to them deeply and ask questions, and I would teach. A student of mine said this, and I just put it all together. And, they say you can't bullshit a bullshitter. Addicts are pretty good like that. When they start getting sober, they've been so into just covering up and lies. They can really detect other people who are liars. And they didn't do that with me. And so I was trying to, 12 steps is great, but there's other stuff. There's like nutrition and relationships and physical health and blah, blah, all of these things. And at that point, I discovered a podcast. It was Ken Wilber's podcast at the time. And I'd read some of his books in graduate school and was mightily impressed with his early work. But I found a PDF file, which is called What is Aqua or something like that, or What is Integral. It was about 40 pages, and it later became the book, The Integral Vision. And I read it, and immediately it was like the Rosetta Stone for recovery. I just saw how, oh, really? Bam, bam, bam. This covers everything and shows you how to do it and how to balance it. And I was just elated. I was in a state of grace. The big light bulb had gone on. So I started calling the Integral folks, and they had a 8 who was answering the phone that day. And I said, my name's John Dupuy. And she said, we don't have time for this. We're busy. Click. And I was in such a state of grace. I was like, they really are busy. They're doing such great work. Didn't faze me at all. So at some point, it started getting into my head that maybe I was going to have to write the book about this, or I was going to have to bring this forward, because it didn't seem anybody was applying Ken Wilber's Aqua map, which is all quadrants, all lines, all levels, and all types, to recovery from addiction. And one of the other main ideas that Ken was bringing forth, and he looked like a Greek god at the time. I mean, he was in great shape, and he suffered physically since then. But it's like all this spirituality and have a great body too. And it's integral practice. You got to work your body, you have to work your mind, you have to work your soul, your interiors, your wounds, your shadow, and a spiritual practice. Yep. And if you put that together, you got something. I think that may be the key for recovery and lifelong sobriety. So I started working on it. And of course, I was struggling with my own depression that would come and go. I remember, if you're depressed, it does go away. When you're in the middle of it, the voice says, this is it, this is forever, this is reality, it'll never change, it'll never get any better. And that's when people commit suicide or harm themselves. So I started working on it, and I started practicing, and I was meditating every day. I'd always been to working out, and I started sharing it with my students. I wrote a couple of papers that got published, and very good responses. And I went and met Ken Wilber, and he said, this is it, really good. No corrections, says you've got it down pretty well. And at that point, I took a little time off from working. My wife was a therapist, and she was still working in the wilderness with clients. And I don't know, 2 or 3 months, and I wrote that book. And that's
wow. I mean, amazing. I'd like to unpack with you a little bit further, John, this amazing model, the integral approach. And honestly, one of the real highlights of the book for me is I read every one of Ken's books. I've read a ton of commentary literature and all these integral medicine, integral law, integral dentistry, whatever. And I honestly, your overview of the integral approach it's the best I've come across. I thought it was really fantastic. And so for me, again, and I'll turn this over to you to give us a brief overview of what is an impossible thing to do in a relatively short period of time. The extraordinarily descriptive and prescriptive power of the integral approach, that it's like you were suggesting, it really does cover all our bases. And so
it leaves nothing that needs to be in there. It covers all the bases. That's why we're such fans of the integral approach. But you mentioned what Aqua alludes to. You ping through a little bit the lines, levels, states, types, that sort of thing. But let's backpedal just a teeny bit, so people who may not be familiar with the integral approach can wrap their mind a little bit around it, and why this is so compelling and so powerful when it comes to things like integral recovery. So an impossible question, but summarize the Aqua approach, the integral approach, and why it is so applicable to things like substance abuse. All right, I'll give the elevator speech here. Okay, so the Aqua, or the integral map, are, I guess, 4 or 5 different lenses that you have to be considered in every occasion if it's going to not leave out something essential. So it starts off with 4 quadrants. Just imagine a cross, and in the upper right, you have you could apply this to hamsters or baseball teams or whatever, but let's just talk about a human being, and probably somebody who's suffering from the disease of addiction. You have physical body, all right? And obviously, if maybe not obviously, but if you've been long-term a heavy user and the disease is progressive, it gets worse and worse, your body is incredibly affected. Whether it's alcohol, whether it's cocaine, whether it's heroin, methamphetamines, you name it, or prescription pills, they beat your body down. So that has to be included. On the other side, the left-hand side, you have the individual interior. Okay, that's your thoughts, your feelings, the part of you that you become well acquainted with if you if you meditate a lot and do interior work. So that's your faith, your hope, your feelings, your hatred, your wounds, your shames, your loves. I mean, all of that stuff is what's in the left-hand upper quadrant. And for example, you could take somebody like you that's very open and understands the beauty of classical music, and you can put on your favorite piece of Mozart or whoever it might be, and you will just go into this magical realm. Well, if we had you hooked up with all the devices now to read the brain and stuff like that, we would see some amazing things going on in your brain. The frontal lobe maybe lights up and different things, and we can compare with people and say, wow, music has a powerful effect on the brain. You know, it does this and that. And that's completely useful and helpful information, but it says nothing about your feeling when you are listening to the music, or in your case, playing the music. For that, we have to ask you, what does it feel like? Or being in love, you could do the same thing. The brain reacts for people that are being in love. Most of us have been there. And, you know, it feels incredible, but you can't understand love just by looking at the brain. It tells you really, really good stuff, but you have to get the interior, the subjective experience. You have to have been in love, talk to people, listen to Beatles songs, sonnets of Shakespeare, or, you know, Rumi. All of these guys, they can tell us about what it is like to be in love. So that's the upper two quadrants. Going down below, lower left, we have your we space, your community, okay, who you hang out with, and that. And there's never been an addict that was created in a vacuum. It's always relational. And when you start using, you know, you can go in your high school, and the majority of people become addicted when they're young, because they determine that the human brain is more susceptible to becoming addicted when you're a teenager than when you're 40 years old. Not that it doesn't happen, but it's usually the exception. So you have to get drugs from somebody, you go to a party, you have a drink, you're 14 years old, it's like the best thing ever. You know, most alcoholics say they can remember that first drink, you know, or that first line or whatever. It was incredible, love at first sight. So you go back to the next party with those people, and it just grows and grows and grows. And then, of course, it starts affecting all your relationships, your family, because they know something's going on. You're acting in weird ways. You start to steal stuff. You know, you get confronted and you rage out and, you know, and attack them for attacking you, and it destroys your relationships. So you build new ones, toxic relationships. The we space is very important. And then if you're going to get well and not let this disease destroy your life and deeply wound the people that you care about, it's going to take a whole village of people to get well. You're not going to do it on your own either, you know. And if you can just go off in the woods and stop drinking and never have another drink, by definition, you're not an addict in my book. You know, an addict is somebody who sees, at some point, they can see what's happening to them when they have those flashes of honesty every once in a while, but they just can't stop. They're powerless over it. And in the moving, the next side, lower right, you have just the physical world, right? And if you come from a family with a lot of money, it's a lot easier to get into, you know, good treatment centers, and they can send you away for 6 months, which is really good. The longer, the better. Or, you know, do you have a house to live? Have you mortgaged the future, you know, of your house, or your children? You know, what is that? Your relationship to the world and all the things it takes to be a human being in a postmodern world that we live in. So all of these quadrants are affected by the disease, the physical body, the individual self, all your interiors, your relational world, and then just your practical world, all of that. And to get better, any model or program that leaves out any one of these essential dimensions is going to be found lacking.
It's a really wonderful overview, John. But in your experience, kind of the blessing and the curse, because it is so comprehensive, is it too much? I mean, when you're working with clients or when you're working with people who act or dealing with levels of substance abuse, what is your personal history in terms of like, whoa, geez, Louise, this is a lot of responsibility. How do people generally respond to this? Is it TMI kind of thing? Or it's like, oh my gosh, this has so much explanatory power. Now I can see how I can work with this kind of divide and conquer approach and then use it in the prescriptive capacity. So what is your personal experience working with people and their receptivity to this integral approach?
Well, obviously, this is not obviously, but this is not the rap that I would give a person their first day in treatment.
Right.
And what? Are you out of your mind? And so everybody's different. And it depends how, your background, who you are, your brain, your life experience, how far down, the hellhole of addiction are you? And first of all, when I worked with students and I worked in the wilderness with these addicts and I worked indoors too, our house became a treatment center for 8 years. That was amazing. And you have to build trust, and the basics. And sometimes you have to be very confrontative, come in, they're angry addicts, they don't want to be here, my parents, blah, blah, F them, blah, blah, that. And I said, okay, I don't really have time to waste with you, so I'll call the sheriff. And they said, you're supposed to be here. And you want to be here, don't mess it up for the rest of these guys who do. Bye-bye. No, okay. So sometimes love is very strong and confrontive. It's not just, oh, you poor baby, it must have been bad. Well, there's a time for that because, yeah, you poor baby, it's been horrible. But you have to really, be the wizard and understand it, where they're at. And eventually, as time goes on, like after a month, I used to say, if I'm still working harder on your recovery than you are, something is sorely missing. Because this is about your life, and I would really like for you to get sober, but man, I got my life already, or got one. So it's just bit by bit. And of course, we're thinking about this from the very beginning. I mean, we're going to have to start dealing with exercise and nutrition and rebuilding brain chemicals and all of that stuff. And we're going to have to find out, or do they have any religious background or spiritual experiences? Are they hardcore atheists? Are they, like most people, kind of agnostic? Or, where do they stand? And then we start, okay, the relationships, because sometimes your relationships growing up will determine whether you become an addict or not. And it definitely seems to be genetic. So if you have two grandparents and both your parents were alcoholic, like, nope, can't go there. The chances of you making it through. And one person told me the Cherokee tribe, they did a study. If you drink as a Cherokee, this is what I was told, and I've had a lot of Native American friends, that you will become an alcoholic.
Wow. There
is no hope. You're just not. So all you have to do is accept that and just not drink, and you can go on. So there's a lot of, and then you have to start planning for, in the lower right, where's he going to live? Can he go back doing what he was doing and with all his old buddies? You don't have a snowball's chance in hell to make it. It takes a whole new reorientation to life. And after a while, people begin to have some hope and say, wow, I can have a life. And this doesn't hang on. And yeah, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do want to toss in one thing just very briefly that I simply forgot to say. A nice little kind of summation tool is the integral approach is basically the inside and the outside of the individual and the collective.
Yes.
Like, what else is there, right? I mean, that pretty much covers everything. And that's the genius of this model. But I was also thinking here, John, that in terms of the integral approach, I guess on one level, what I'm hearing you saying is that you can be an integral provider and you don't have to spell out the integral model for a person, right? I mean, you can just simply approach your treatment. If you're actually someone who is working to help someone in recovery, your approach can be integral. You don't have to overwhelm them with a map that actually creates your methodology.
Right.
So I guess the question there would be, so on that level, I can see it's not an issue, but someone picks up your book and they want to self-provide, right? Then I'm curious, like what have you, in your experience, has been the level of receptivity towards that? Someone who picks it up and says, whoa, this is effing awesome, or like, whoa, this is like effing too much. So I'm curious what your response or experience has been around that more individual level.
Well, right. And it really depends. If you're dealing with a 13-year-old addict, you're not going to sit them down and tell them about Ken Wilber's model. However, I did do groups, kind of like I'm talking to you and explaining these things to many groups of adolescents and young adults. And often I would get, well, why didn't anybody ever tell us this? It was like, really?
Yeah.
So, but you have to be, each individual's an individual. And so you have to kind of be sensitive. It's half science and half art, and so you gotta figure out these things and when appropriate and how it works together. And when you have whole groups of people working on this stuff together, it becomes a communal experience. And it just depends on the individual. Yes, you hold the integral, but you don't shove it down their throats until it seems appropriate, if it would be helpful at that point.
Fantastic. And so before we transition into, to give you a scope of where I'd like to take this, before we transition into some of the more 50,000-foot view, dare we say, philosophical approaches to the larger kind of principles of sobriety, intoxication, and the like, I want to just have you riff a little bit on some of the things that I found really particularly illuminating in your book. And one was this, I think, incredibly helpful distinction between distress and eustress. In other words, the two forms of dissonance, sure, one of which is not so healthy, that's distress, and one which is actually a driver for evolution and growth. And I think in your own words, you say stress is the mother of evolution. And like, on one level, Trungpa Rinpoche, the radical, his work, who the Siddha from the Tibetan tradition famously said, chaos should be regarded as extremely good news. Well, it sounds good on paper, doesn't sound so great in life. So talk to us a little bit about how eustress, the beneficial stress, can be a propeller from, again, brief interjection with the integral approach, from translational approaches to transformational approaches to the human experience.
Well, absolutely. And being in the wilderness, by the way, for a lot of people is causes distress in the beginning, but quickly becomes eustress. And you're in the wilderness. We don't come in if it rains or snow. There's a blizzard. We had tarps, didn't even have tents, and we'd have to start the fire using the friction method. And everybody had to learn how to do that and cook together and set up camp and restore the place we camped afterwards. We crush all the coals and then scatter the ashes in the bushes and stuff. So you literally couldn't see we had a fire, unless it was an established fireplace that's been used for centuries. That's different. So it's very hard. You're not in great shape, and you start clunking up the mountain or down into the canyon, and it's really hard. And that's good because it's exercise. Being one of the things that I stress so much is you put your body under stress, but that's positive stress. It changes your brain chemistry in positive ways. It just pushes you. You learn that you can push yourself. You learn that you're tougher than you thought, that, you start building self-confidence and your body starts feeling better, and go, wow, compare this to what I was doing before. And you can start making those decisions. So being too easy is really not good. And that's why I selected, for the most of the time I was working in the wilderness, because I could have a bad day and the wilderness was still there and helping these people grow. And the whole spiritual conversation in the Utah wilderness under the stars at night becomes, sure. It's just like, yeah. I mean, it puts in a state of awe, which is one of the beginning things of spirituality. Mm-hmm. And later on, I started using the technology and iAwake technology, and people started progressing really quickly in their meditation. And from being F this, F that, I hate religion, I was abused by this or that, and just all this resistance, they begin to see that, wait, this is for me. I'm not doing it to please anybody else. And in my meditation room in our house, the first, I don't know, week or so, everybody just laid out on the meditation cushion. And after a couple of weeks, you have all these little Buddhas there, really focusing on there. And I had doing an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. Can you imagine a bunch of addicts right off the streets meditating for 2 hours a day? But and then we would discuss, well, what came up for you? And sometimes things for the past, how do you deal with shadow stuff and the pain as it emerges? How do you deal with, the incessant yabbering of your own mind and all these things? And so people could share with each other. And obviously I was kind of the senior student, and people could start helping one another. And it became something by and large that they embraced, and they felt good about being in treatment because it was small, it was very loving, it was very hard, it was very cool, and had a lot of things going for it.
I'm wondering along those lines, when you start to introduce meditation, which I think is a fantastic integral approach. I'm curious how this lands with you, John, is that, again, when I look at my own experience with recreational drugs, which I don't do that at all. I mean, I'll engage in that type of thing as that kind of a psychonaut now to just explore my mind under those particular agents. But like anybody else, I'll have a cocktail. If I'm in the Yucatan, I like my little margarita, and I know it's in my own experience when I engage in something like that, what it does for me is, in a certain playful way, double entendre intended, it acts as a solvent in a certain way. It liquefies my relationship to the contents of my mind. It puts my mind in solution, quote unquote. And so, and another way to say this, and this is the one I want to see how this lands with you, and I think why this is important in terms of understanding why people are doing what they do, is that it alters our relationship to the contents of our mind. And that may seem somewhat clinical, but that's sure as heck what it does for me. Prior to drinking, my thoughts are so reified, they're so solid, they're so heavy. I think that's the central ingredient of depression. The more you reify, solidify the contents of your mind, the more it takes you down because everything is so heavy. Conversely, enlightenment is de-reification. The more you de-reify the contents of the mind, the more uplifted and light you are. So is it fair to say, in your own experience, and also working, again, this is where I made the disclaimer at the beginning, I don't want to be facile and dismissive about the seriousness and the intensity of what actually takes place in traditional instances of substance abuse. But I do think that we can perhaps explore parsing out, taking apart, reducing healthy reductionism, the phenomenology of the addictive process and what takes place when we engage in these. So is it fair to say from your experience working with others that this alteration in relationship to the contents of mind is one of the drivers that people may not be aware of when they imbibe in it? And then when they engage in meditation, what are you doing? You're cultivating a healthy new relationship to the contents of mind, right? So instead I playfully say, take a sip of space. Take a sip of space, take a drink of space as a way to establish a new perspective and a relationship to your heart, mind, feeling. So does that land with you, or does that seem a little bit too facile?
Well, no. And one of the things after we do the meditation, there were some of the best groups I ever did in my life. An hour of this stuff and things begin to loosen up and you begin to identify the addict voice. And what does the addict voice want to do? It's almost like having a demon inside of you. It wants to destroy your life and kill you. And it'll use any weakness or any excuse at all to get you using again. And so they begin to learn that part of themselves, and they begin to learn the spiritual part, the emotional and the intellectual. It begins to be more spacious. And and harm reduction is great if you can do it. But, there's different degrees of this disease. And some, you can be 10 years sober, you have one drink, see ya. You're off to the races. You're trying to make up for 10 years of drinking. And that's the deal. And a lot of people that I've worked with were having problems with drugs, okay, or alcohol. Mm-hmm. They were going through a rough spot in their life. Maybe they're partying too much. Maybe they hadn't dealt with some of the issues that were handed them when they were growing up. And they just, okay, they can moderate, they can change their habits, and that's fine. And every addict in the world would love to be that person. But you just have to finally, after enough relapses, after enough crises, enough time in jail, enough broken relationships, you begin to get, no, I really can't. And I really wish I could, but all the wishing ain't going to change anything. And I've got this predisposition, and it kicks my ass and wins every time. So yeah, if you can do that, that's noble and good. And if you can drink. If you can't, you can't. Sorry, I didn't make that world. That's just the way it is.
The other thing that immediately comes to mind here is that, and this is what I meant when I said facile, and it just clicked to me. It's a type of in integral language quadrant absolutism, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket or in one quadrant. So in other words, someone who's, and this is an extreme example, but I think you get it. Someone who's like really deep into the meditative spiritual thing, and for instance, let's say, oh, they're really deep into emptiness teachings, and they'll say, oh my God, it's just everything's empty. Relate to the contents of your mind. They put everything in the upper left quadrant in the inner I aspect. And then, hey, what a surprise, that doesn't work, because it doesn't pay, like you're saying, if I'm hearing you properly, it doesn't acknowledge the severity of the biophysical aspects of it, how this stuff is actually working at a physical level in your brain, neurochemically, with neurotransmitters and whatnot. It doesn't acknowledge that, let alone the we quadrant and the it quadrant. So I think this helps me answer my own question. And I want to just, again, toss it back into your court, that it's very easy. And I look at my own experience, it's like, if this person was just a meditator, they wouldn't have to drink. Boy, geez, there's a classic.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. And so again, the genius of the integral approach, the humility that it brings about, that it's saying, yes, there's truth in every one of these. And why not take advantage of all these different modalities within each one of these quadrants as a way to address the multifactorial complex nature of this disease? Because otherwise, it can become dismissive and fast. Just say, oh, it's just like with dieting. Oh, why don't they just use their willpower, right? Because again, we don't approach the complex, messy nature of these types of phenomena.
Yeah, and addiction destroys your willpower. That's like the first thing to go. That's why you can't quit.
Yeah.
But also you're absolutely right in the upper right, the physical. There's all kinds of stuff. I mean, we've learned more about the brain in the past 15 years and the prior 15,000. We're just learning more and more about it. And we did a lot of education. This is why you do this, and this is what the brain reacts, and this is why, what an addict's brain does, and this is what it doesn't happen in another person. So yeah, that's very important. And you're right. Whatever area you neglect will probably be the area that will cause you to relapse. So you just got to cover all the bases as well as you can.
That's let's put an exclamation point on that. That is really well said. So if you don't acknowledge in this particular cartography, all four quadrants, one of those other three is going to come up and bite you in the ass.
Yep.
And that's really, I think, very helpful. And so in relation to this, also, I really love your languaging here. Again, bringing in this relationship issue to the contents of mind, the kind of meditative aspect. I love when you talk about urge surfing. That's such an interesting neologism for me. It's like establishing a new relationship to, in this case, surf the contents of desire and urge and relate to it instead of from it. So since we are talking a little bit about the upper left, the inner phenomenological aspect, talk to us a little bit about that before we transition into some of the other issues.
Well, urge surfing, is that what you'd like?
Yeah. I just think it's such an interesting, beautiful phrase. And again,
the addicts and alcoholics who've been through this will know when the wave rises or that craving comes, it's like it's not like I would really like a drink. That would be great. It feels like you're going to die if you don't have a drink. Okay. And it's panic. It's a type of craving that either you have to go on through it or you have to sit around the campfire and listen to people tell their stories for, dozens of years. But it does pass like a wave, comes up and it goes. I said, okay, I'm here. I feel okay. I didn't drink myself under the table. I made it. Okay. And that's really something to celebrate. You know, is it go to a meeting if those urges, call somebody. But if you can resist the urge with the support of your community, with God's help, with every the things that you have to build in, you actually begin to get better at it. And you can, and the waves become less powerful. But, you know, in the first year, if you're a hardcore, you know, alcoholic or drug addict, it's really hard. And you need a lot of help, but it starts getting better. And I was a cigarette addict, nicotine addict for a number of years. And a lot of my heroin addict students said, oh man, heroin was easy compared to cigarettes.
Yeah.
And I went through all that, and I really get it, but I really am done at this point. And I see somebody smoking, I don't get, oh, can I have a cigarette? It really disgusts me. And I want to say something to them, which thank God I don't. But anyway, but it was a real battle, and I relapsed a number of times.
Yeah, well, good for you for popping out on that. I mean, again, it's no small thing, right? So one topic that also fits in here that I found very insightful, wonderful contribution in your book is your experience and your professional expertise with brainwave entrainments.
Yeah.
And using, again, I'm really big into this. So for my listeners, they've heard me use this term before, the whole neurophenomenology aspect, you know, that what you do with your brain, that's the neural part, has an effect on your experience. What you do with your experience has an effect on your brain. So it's this two-way street. And wonderful, really gifted thing about integral approaches again, and this is like bringing spirituality up to date in a certain sense. I'm sure if the Buddha had access to brainwave entrainment or some of these other agents, he probably would have been all over it.
Sure.
So talk to us a little bit about your experience with BWE, how it works, how you might invite us to explore it, and then you're very generously going to give our listeners a kind of a demo of this. So I found this one of the richest parts of your book. So talk to us a little bit about this. Again, this fits in beautifully within the upper left. And
can I hit something else first that is really
totally. All right.
And I will definitely get to that, because that's a huge part of my contribution to the recovery scene is using this technology. But one of the other parts of the integral map, which we haven't hit on or may not have time, are the stages of development. Okay.
Huge.
And you know, spiral dynamics, check it out. Or Ken Wilber has his own version. And I've been working with this just as a human being, an observer of myself and others. And it's one of the most important things. Roger Walsh says that it's like the most important thing emerged out of psychology in the last 50 years, adult stages of development. So you start out, I'll go really quick, and it's in colors and all this, but you start out there when you're an infant, you're very primitive survival, like our ancestors a long time ago, 150,000 years ago, or they keep pushing that back. And then you get into a magical kind of tribal, like the toddler stage, where, you know, it's a magical world and spirits have to be propitiated and all of that, and you can start banding together in tribes. And then comes red, which is angry leader, he who has power. It's all about control. Look at Vladimir Putin right now. He's a really good example of somebody at that level. Emotional level is very red. After that came blue, which is when the great religious traditions began to emerge beyond shamanism, Christianity and Judaism first, it was there first, and the different things in the Orient, and probably ending up with Islam. And all of these this level of development is very good, really good controlling Vikings, you know, stop raping and pillaging. Okay, Jesus is here. He wants you to, you know, be different or something like that. And it's really good. The problem with that is, though, there's only one truth, you know, and if you have it and you don't, I can treat you like you're less than human. You're an infidel or non-believer, however that goes. And then after that, a modernism began to emerge where it wasn't the bones of saints or scripture or any of that are, magic statues that showed us what to do, but it was science and evidence-based experiments that you could repeat over and over again. And you could start building a model of understanding somewhat how the universe works, which is really good. Unfortunately, it did away with the baby and the bathwater for religion, and it was rejected, and that led to problems. And so that can also lead to a disenchanted world, world where there's no spirit, no ultimate purpose. It's all just, we're reacting to our stimuli, and anyway, it's a very dark reality. However, it has brought so many gifts, like the science that the fact that we're talking here, having this conversation, and people all over the place are going to have it later. I mean, that's crazy. And I read one place that in first world countries, antibiotics, which, they get a bad rap, has added, average 30 years to each of our individual lives.
Yeah.
That's a lot of living. So after that emerged the green, the postmodern, kind of what emerged in the 60s, love for the earth, everybody's invited, against racism, sexism, this isn't that, and animal rights, Native American rights, everybody's rights, the planet's rights. It's very sensitive. It's very brings great compassion and sensitivity to the world, but yet it has its own problems when you really can't handle things. It's like green, it's called it in spiral dynamics. They really don't know what to do with Russia invading the Ukraine. It's kind of like, well, maybe if they just knew that we really loved them, they would stop firing missiles.
Right.
It's like, no, doesn't work. So it's really good to have that, but you have to move into what's called second tier, when you start to put together all these different levels and all their strength and take out the parts that are no longer serviceable. Okay. The good parts of traditionalism, the honesty, do the right thing, service, individuality, the brilliance of modern scientific worldview and all it's achieved, the kind of the ruthless power of red, that warrior self that sometimes comes, we need that at certain times. You're getting mugged by three guys in a dark alley. You don't say, okay, let's stop. Can we hold hands a second? I'd like just to be here with you. You're going to get murdered. Okay. And then kind of the earlier primal stuff, which is what a lot of us rediscovered, the wisdom of our ancestors and our relationship to the earth and all other creatures. So that's all good stuff. We can put that together. But the reason I said this, to add it to our discussion on integral recovery, is that this is so amazing. But when you start using, and say you have progressed in a pretty stable way into modern, the scientific modern worldview, excuse me. When you start using, you start going back down the hill. Instead of evolution, you have devolution.
Yeah.
And as you're living in a street in a cardboard box, you're almost at a pre-human level of existence, and it doesn't matter anymore. You will still cheat, kill, sell your body, do whatever. It doesn't matter. Oh, children, I had children. What? No, I got to get more drugs. Okay. And that is a tragedy. What we see when people start getting sober in a good treatment center and with support, they begin to recover the lost ground quite quickly. Like, oh, okay, here's where I was. And then that's when you can look back and look at all the stuff you've done and go, oh my God, what have I done? How the people I've hurt, the years that I've wasted, the gifts that I have that were squandered, and it's good. It's good to feel those feelings. You don't just go, oh, it's okay. It's not really okay. It sucks. And feel the pain. And that becomes one of the things that often can help you from doing it again.
Yeah.
Because you just don't want to hurt people anymore. And that's a pretty high level of moral development. So you get there back pretty quickly. And from there, because you know the models and you know that you're not the top of the food chain, ethically or morally or spiritually, it's like, wow, I got a lot of work to do, which is great because I think it was a Jewish mystic who said, it's good to know what's above you because it gives you humility,
Yeah.
and you have actually something to aspire to.
Yep.
And, that there's levels of myself that are wiser, more compassionate, more effective. And how do I get there? Practice. Comes back to the integral practice. And I used to tell my students who are in the wilderness, I'd get out, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. They really got it. So you lose in the progression of this disease, you devolve in your emotional and spiritual status into just, if it's not stopped, in just some kind of pre-human creature. Okay, but there is hope. It's hope. It's not hopeless. You can take these people and they can go back, and maybe sometimes there's a lot of damage that's done that never be able to fix, but most of it, as with alcoholics, the body can repair itself, and you can get better. So just to say that we have that developmental lens that we look through. So if you're a green, progressive person and you're talking to a red meth addict, and you just go, okay, brother, I know it's been bad. And I'm trying not to make fun, but you approach them in this soft, compassionate way, and you touch your shoulder. They're going to freak out at you. Who the F are you? And get out of my face and blah, blah. So you have to learn as a provider to speak to people in the language of the level that they're at.
That's right. That's huge, John. In fact, thank you so much. One of the reasons I just temporarily backed away from the integral approaches, because again, it's such an incredibly wide body of teachings and aspects. And so the stage developmental thing is absolutely colossal. And you just nailed several of the key points in my opinion. One is, the definition of skillful means upaya in Sanskrit. For me, it's not meeting people where you're at, meeting people where they're at. And that requires a tremendous sensitivity, profound, deep listening, and then therefore also in an actualization and not a dominating sense. So let me just toss this in very briefly. One of the issues when I first heard about this stuff is like, oh, this is classic Western patriarchal hierarchical BS, right? Well, then Ken, of course, in his comprehensive way says, well, there's a big difference between dominator hierarchies and actualization hierarchies. Colossal. So this is not a dominator hierarchy. This is an articulation of human development, cross-culturally studied for hundreds of years at this point, basically, and proven through countless studies. But the idea here is touching people where they're at, listening to them, speaking to them at their level, and then they're going to listen to you. And so this is the importance. It's not just theory. This is the prescriptive end of this descriptive approach. Now you can use this prescriptively to what?
To save lives.
Say skillfully relate to other people and save their lives. But the other thing that is really very helpful, what you shared here as well, is how these agents, these drugs and whatnot, basically act as devolutionary drivers, that they basically throw us back down into the basement where all, like you mentioned, that's where the beasts live, in the basement. And the fact that we can then recognize that, but interestingly enough, even in fact, our mutual friend Roger Walsh, I remember very clearly at the beginning of the COVID thing, we did this kind of big group webinar type of thing with a bunch of other people, and he shared studies when the world was falling apart, that according to these studies, that when things fall apart, the default is generally regressive and not progressive.
Under stress.
We tend to just go down. And so therefore, again, this tremendous kind of explanatory power behind these stages and how they can really help us relate to ourselves. And so let me just toss this out to you. In your experience, when one actually progresses to second tier, and maybe we can say just a little bit about, you intimated it, but maybe a little bit more articulation about the difference between first tier and second tier. When people actually enter second tier, are they, in your experience, somehow immune to these addictive principles, or can the tail continue to wag the dog, right? I mean, are you somehow, it doesn't matter how far up you go, can the tail still wag the dog?
No, the students that I got, no, I don't see there's any protection at all. from you're intellectually getting to be second tier. I mean, that's a really good thing. And the world starts to be stitched back together again. It's amazing, but nah, you still got the same genes. And in fact, you might have more brilliant excuses why you're okay. You know, the addict mind spins stories and it will try to use any knowledge you have against you. So it doesn't seem to help. However, I have found that it seems to my integral friends that have come to me, they seem to progress further, more quickly. They just kind of get it. And they go, okay, I knew all this stuff anyway. So whether he's saying it or not, I knew this was basically what I got to do. So the buy-in is a little bit easier. And I think it does make the journey, it does facilitate the journey of recovery.
And the other thing that you mentioned beautifully in your book that has to be mentioned here, it's very easy when you deal with, like, we haven't even talked about the different types, the Enneagram and all these other things. One near enemy of this level of articulation is reification, pigeonholing, slotting people into these things. And so what you share in your book that is really brilliant, John, is you talk about these stages. They're not of people, they're within people. And this is really important because then this brings about a sense of empathy, compassion that, hey, wait a second, I have the capacity to be an addict. I have the capacity to be a Buddha or whatever. We understand the multitudinous display of the spectrum of our own identity. And that, yes, for instance, we're operating out of this particular bandwidth, but hey, I like the Dalai Lama says, we're in a certain way, we're all the same. We all have the same fundamental potentiality, either progressive or regressive. And therefore understanding that these stages are not of people, they're within people is really helpful, because otherwise it's like, oh, I'm hanging out at teal or turquoise or whatever, I'm never going to fall back. Oh yeah, I mean, we all have the capacity to drop back into these lower bandwidths, and then conversely, we all have the capacity not to identify with those and also come back up. So that, I think, is a really wonderful contribution in your book that I want to thank you for. I mean, just spot on. So anything else before, anything we should say briefly about lines and types, since we're doing such a great tour of this?
Okay, well, yeah, types, the ones that we use most of the time were the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And that's because I studied that in grad school, and Leslie Hirschberger is a really good friend of mine, and she's a really amazing expert at it. And I learned even before integral recovery was even a thought, we'd be out, hiking in the wilderness, and we'd have to sit in an alcove while there was a blizzard going on. And I would start explaining to people the Enneagram, the students, and it's like, really? Oh my God, my dad is such a 3 and mom's a 4. They just love it. And they love, people really like learning about themselves.
Yeah.
Unless you're a 4, then you're like, don't put me in the box. I am special beyond all reason, And so, oh, you're a 4. Oh, that really gets them back. So no, it's super helpful. And I think there's more studies to be done, but I think the different points, personality types keep showing up. Why it's so, I don't know, but it seems to work this way. We'll use drugs for different reasons. Like if you're 6, like me, it's probably calm your anxiety and your fear. 6 is a very fear-based. Either you're phobic or counterphobic. I was more your counterphobic. I learned martial arts and learned how to shoot guns and was a soldier and did all these things and military policeman. So I could be tough enough to handle this unsafe world. So people might use it in different ways. And in these different points, there are really unhealthy aspects of it, average, and really healthy. So most addicts in the late phases of this disease are exhibiting all the negative aspects of it. So there's this thing where you go in and everybody goes, you listen to other people talk and you read the book and you start to self-identify. I didn't have time to do that. So they would come in, I said, read chapter 3, and they'd be, you've been reading my mail, it was like really good. And we just cut to the chase because they were really exhibiting a lot of the negative aspects. And that's really clear. However, when you do get to these higher levels, it's often harder to tell because you begin to take on the positive aspects of all the different points, and you just kind of, And yeah, so the more of all people that I know, and I wouldn't even hazard a guess for you, by the way, are a little harder. But at the more dysfunctional levels, it's not that hard. It's pretty obvious to me, anyway.
Let me just share with our listeners as well. When I first learned my Enneagram type, and I'm a big, there's so much literature here. You know, Helen Palmer's, I did workshops with her. She's a genius. She's a big integralist person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in seminars with her. She's a rock star. Almas's work, Facets of Unity. I mean, his work with the Enneagram is like, are you kidding me? And I have to share, when I first started looking at the stuff, I came in with a skepticism. Oh, here's another Myers-Briggs thing. I've done this at every work position. I cannot tell you the impact when I finally realized that I was a 5. You know, I mean, I thought it was a 3 and I thought it was a 1. But then when I read it, and I sat there, it was a really interesting experience for me, John. It was a combination of complete elation and exhilaration, like, oh my God, somebody, how did they know, right? How did they know that sometimes I like to take my phone off the hook so I don't have to connect to people, right? So on one level, it was like, this is amazing. On another level, it was really humbling. I mean, I wouldn't say embarrassing, but incredibly humbling that I've really slot into this 5 into a level that's like, you got to be effing kidding me. And so again, this is, listeners might wonder, oh, geez, you know, I like the spontaneous display of mind and behavior. Well, that's fine. But one of the biggest issues with me as a psychonaut, and especially an oneironaut, is exploring this woolly, otherwise incredibly woolly, fuzzy thing we call the human condition, and in particular, our minds, our personas, and our being. And so for me, and again, this is the orange part, the rational part, looking into that. When I read this stuff, instead of like shrink wrapping, pigeonholing, this is the genius of articulation. It's like, oh my God, it doesn't have to be a fog fest in there. I operate on these particular stage levels, and then there's the whole state thing, then there's the line thing, then there's the type thing. And for the listener, you go like, are you kidding me? Just, I'd rather drink a beer or take a nap. No, look at this stuff because it will help you profoundly understand the way you work, bringing unconscious processes into the light of consciousness. That's a massive ingredient in liberation. And then just as importantly, it's not just for you. Just like we talked about earlier, understanding this will help you relate to others. So that jerk over there, well, they're not a jerk. We haven't even talked about this. They're a jerk because of your shadow work or an unwork. You know, you're projecting all this stuff, whether you know it or not, right? And so I want to emphasize this because otherwise listeners new to this going, what do you mean? Shadows, lines, levels, states, types. Lord, why does it have to be so complicated? It's not complicated. It's the human condition that's complicated. This is a level of articulation that can help you relate to your self-sense in a much more sophisticated way. And then also, just as importantly, relate with compassion, empathy, and understanding. Now I understand. I can story that person's existence. I can see why that person drinks. I can understand why they do what they do because I have this entirely new skill set that allows me to meet them where they're at. So I say that because this is not armchairing philosophy. This isn't sophistry. This is street value, cash value material that can really help you work with yourself and with others. And so that's why what you emphasize and write about in your book so beautifully, this is the best summary of the stuff I've ever come across, John.
Yeah, some of my integral friends called me lovingly, dumb it down, Dupuy. So anyway, I said, thank you. I appreciate that. What was I going to say? You said so much there. Anyway, I have one little story I want to tell. And by the way, into the BWE, this became one of the kind of the story that would help us to put it all together and why we're doing this. And so I think this is an old wisdom story. I don't know what tradition it came from, but I learned it from a Native American version. And there's this young man, and he has this dream. And in the dream, he sees these two powerful beasts, let's say dogs. One is a beautiful, noble looking, just gorgeous dog. And the other one is like this junkyard, spike collar, just foaming at the mouth, all this stuff. And they have this big big, huge fight. And he wakes up in the middle of that. And he's really flipped out. So he goes to his grandfather. I don't know if it's his real grandfather, but that's what we do in the Native American circles. Everybody's a nephew or an uncle or an aunt, or, you know, it's great.
Right.
But he said, grandfather, I had this dream. I'm so disturbed. It just shocked me. And I just don't know what it means. So he said, well, grandson, tell me the dream. So he tells him the dream. And he said, grandson, these two dogs are the two parts of yourself. One is noble and strong and good and a warrior to take care of his people and for the old people and the children and the women, everything a warrior is supposed to be. And the other one is just a savage beast who just wants to destroy and hurt and tear up whatever it gets a hold of. And he goes, wow, he's just like, damn, that's rough. He says, but don't worry, grandson, your good dog is going to win. He says, well, okay, that's good. But how can you say that? He says, because you're going to feed the good dog.
Beautiful. Wow.
That's the story. That's recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. Which dog, or I've heard it in terms of wolves, which wolf are you going to feed?
Right.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing I want to throw in that's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that. That's spot on. The other thing I wanted to say, and again, after we talk about brainwave entrainment, I want to then come back to the high level view of this stuff. As an intimation are heading towards that, one of the things for me, I think is helpful to keep in mind, John, is that all these lines, levels, states, studs, whatever, these are all colorings of consciousness. And so when we return later, I want to talk a little bit about the power of healthy reductionism. And on one level, and this again is really beautifully important, and what this means, because it's all a coloring of consciousness, when you're in a particular funk, and now this isn't just merely addiction. This can be related to depression. This can be related to any psychopathology. It's basically an exclusive identification, or at least temporarily exclusive identification, reified, particular contraction around a particular experience or state of mind. It's a coloring of the mind. It's a coloring of consciousness. And so if you understand this, then when you're in a total funk, you're like really depressed, if you can have this right view that, like right now, my coloring is black. You like, paint me black, right? I am coloring consciousness black. And then what you could do then, and it's actually been a practice, my meditation masters told me this. They said, when you're feeling really, really, really low, bring to mind, remember those instances when you were feeling really, really, really high. When you're feeling really high, in those moments, remember, bring to mind those feelings when you were feeling really low. What's the same and what's different? And you will find that there's something fundamentally quite the same, and that's experience itself, irrespective of the coloring book, right? And so I think that helps reduce in a healthy way, simplifies, again, without the pejorative aspect of that level of simplification, that these are ways to understand both in all four quadrants, the way the mind consciousness is colored, phenomenologically, biologically, culturally, socially. And to me, I find that it Ken also completely understands this when he says, well, that represents the paper upon which the quadrants are actually articulated, right? So I think that's worth throwing into the mix, because otherwise, again, it can be a little bit TMI for some folks. But I'm curious also if that lands and relates to your own experience.
Well, I don't think anybody, including Ken Wilber, got this in one day. You know, it takes, like anything that is worth doing well. And you were telling me about your expertise at the piano. God knows how many hundreds of thousands of hours you put in on that. That's why you're good today. So there's just, you know, baby steps going in the right direction. And you can think of this whole map as OS, an operating system. Okay, it's not the data, but it helps you organize everything where it needs to go. It's like, oh, and after a while, you don't have to, well, that's a quadrant. You just kind of see the things as they are. And some people put it down, well, it's just the map. Don't confuse the map with the territory, which is so ridiculous. Have you ever done that? Have you had a road map and you thought, that's Paris? It's so small. Nobody thinks like that. But I want to get to Paris. This is how I'm going to have to do it. So the map has it helps you to travel through the terrain. Yeah. And if you're in the wilderness, it can save your life. So maps are not to be dismissed, but just to make sure that they're they have enough detail to cover all the things and see all the things that we need to see on the journey. And if you use it wisely, if you don't, put a big statue of the map and start bringing it flowers and get weirded out, it can be a tool to help you grow. And another thing I wanted to say, going back to the stages, when I started teaching this stuff at a wilderness program where the staff were mainly green and postmodern progressives, and I started talking about these stages, hierarchical stages. They just don't like hierarchies. They're oppressive. It means I'm higher, I'm better than you. And of course, it can be used that way. Anything that humans can mess up, they tend to do that. But I started describing it as expanding circles of compassion.
Exactly.
And they were right with me. Like, bam, got it, so.
Spot on. And the other thing, again, just to say, this is why you may want to mess with this stuff. Here's the kicker, and this. We're operating with this outdated operating system, whether we know it or not. What this does is it updates it. This is an update. Pops in, don't delay it, update it. Because here's the kicker. You're living out of these states, all the stuff we're talking about, whether you know it or not. This is at work now, whether you know it or not. And Ken writes about this beautifully. We're in prison, samsara. We're living basically, what is the data these days, John? 95% minimum of what we do is dictated by unconscious processes. All well, right. This is the 95% is what comprises everything we're talking about at unconscious levels. So you are, whether you know it or not, you are imprisoned by these unconscious processes operating whether you know it or not. In Buddhist language, this is what it means to be asleep. So as Ken says, hey, prison break, here's a good map. Then you can bring these processes into the light of consciousness, individuation in Jungian terms, relate to it instead of from it, because relating from it, that's no relationship at all, right? That's samsara. And so again, I want to say this, like, this is why you want to mess with this stuff, because otherwise, if you don't, it's going to mess with you. It's already working underneath, controlling at all these levels, whether you know it or not. We're just bringing this up to the light of consciousness, so now you can relate to it, and then you have a choice. Then you can be free. Prisoners don't have a choice, right?
And you don't want to get into at this stage in your life. Well, maybe the time will come, and you go, yeah, it's about time to look into this thing. So just trust yourself, and at a certain point, it's very, very, very helpful, especially if you've been on a spiritual journey like I had been most of my life, and of course my work in the world with addicts.
One of the ways I look at this, John, is it's a form of vipassana. It's a form of insight meditation, analytic meditation, where I think you can absolutely completely contextualize it in this regard, and therefore also bring about a more integral approach between East and West, because a lot of these contributions really do come from the West, using methods of analysis and statistics and whatnot that basically aren't available to Eastern methods of personal inquiry and phenomenology and the like. And so to me, this is also integral in spirit, that we can raise our gaze, look at all these different contributions, both from the East and the West. And we haven't really talked a ton about states. We can say maybe just a few things about states to say that's an Eastern contribution. Maybe just a teeny little bit about shadow work, because I think that's the last thing. Well, there's one more. And then at least mention the 5 classic lines, right? It's like, oh, there's more. Well, all this stuff, again, has tremendous applicability. So let's hit on those 3 just a little bit. Then we can talk about brainwave entrainment and then take it up to the 50,000 foot view. Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan. So we were talking about states of consciousness, which is part of the map, and how early on in my lifetime, we confuse states with stages. In other words, we'd have a LSD experience where we were one with God and it was all good, and we had these incredible visions, and we thought we were enlightened, and then the drugs wore off. Oops, here I am. So
still here.
That's very important. And I found this was probably the easiest thing in the world to teach addicts about states, because they spent their whole lives in the last few years chasing states. Yeah, when to get to that point, right when the heroin was, just that, oh my God, it was so good. And drinking, all of that stuff, and the cocaine, unfortunately, the effects begin to change, and you can never quite get to that desired state or high. So you try mixing drugs and more drugs and this and that and the other, and it doesn't work. So what you don't want to be a prisoner to your states of consciousness. Now, healthy states are wonderful, okay, and we should be grateful for them, but they won't last. They'll come in and go through, just like depression. It's not a life sentence. It's a thing we move through, and so we cultivate positive states, but through our relationships, through our practices, through listening to wise people, reading good books, good music, all of this stuff, and they're good, but just know that they come and they go, but when we start being ruled by states, that's when you become a prisoner and you become an addict. And it could be sexual addiction. I mean, any kind of addiction. It's the same thing. You're chasing the state. You become
literally a state junkie. Yep. And we're going to talk more about that later when I talk about how dangerous this is, where practitioners become spiritual state junkies. Sure. And that can really talk about de-evolve your path. So cool. We got states down, right? Oh, and then classically, right, just briefly, the classic states are sleeping, dreaming, waking, and then the fourth. So just to throw that into the mix. So a little bit about, just to be complete, and thank you for this. All started with your interjection of bringing the stages back into play. Just a few words about lines, and then a little bit about shadow work, because these are also, especially shadow work, whoa, especially in the spiritual business, this is massively missing. So a little bit about those two, okay?
Okay. Well, lines is simply looking at, lines that are not horizontal, but pointing up and down.
Yeah, vertical. Yep.
Vertical. Thank you very much. And they represent, the lines represent different human capacities or skills. All right. And we've picked a few that are absolutely essential for stable lifetime recovery. And then the vertical lines are nice because, you can look at it like really low, like, oh my gosh. And you can kind of just intuitively do this. You don't need, a psychologist and whole batteries of tests to figure out, it's like, my mathematical line is really bad, and you don't have me try to solve that calculus problem over there for me to figure that out. I got it. Okay. So, the ones that are essential, we found, is kinesthetic, the body. Okay. Body, that's the vehicle that we run around in for our whatever amount of time that we have. So to honor it and to make it healthy and to make it a tool of our higher self is about as good as it can get. Yeah, and it's good to look nice and look sexy and appear nice. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. But even deeper than that, there's a need for our bodies to be healthy so that we can be of service. And of course, that's nutrition and
exercise.
Food and exercise, yoga, energy work, all kinds of things, sports, engaging in. So that's very important. And usually if you're a drug addict, it's way down. Of course, I work with some professional football players. They were doing drugs in order to keep playing, either to make their muscles bigger or overcome the pain and different stuff like that. But that's another story. So you have the body, then you have the mind. That's basically your intellectual life. What you know, and we should seek out things that are useful and helpful, because we live at a time when there's almost infinite content on the internet. You can on YouTube and just find out anything you want about anything. So, and you can get lost in that. So what is going to make me a better person? I used to think this before I quite figured it out. So I'm going to live my life as if I have something to do that matters. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to do really stupid things. I did cocaine twice, and the second time I was like, I can't do this anymore. I love this stuff. This is ridiculous. No, thank you. And so to listen to wise people, to ask questions, to read the great works of literature, to study history and science and psychology and spirituality and mathematics, all these things, however it works, it's very important. because if you fill your mind with garbage, you'll get, garbage in, giggle, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So the mind is, and it's not the enemy. The mind is a tool that's like nothing else that we discovered in the universe thus far. I haven't run into ET yet. So it's something very precious. And I think at Green and Progressive, sometimes we think that we just stop thinking, and that's the whole story, and you stop thinking, you're enlightened. Could be just dissociated. And by the way, fives are easier to do that than others, because you can just dissociate like anybody's business. Okay, so the body, the mind, the emotional interior self, and that is all your stuff. It feels like being alive, and your wounds, your loves, your hatreds, what bores you, what turns you on, your theories, you're working on all the stuff, and every night when we sleep, I'm speaking with the dream master here, often we kind of reprocess and get rid of all that stuff that we collected during the day. So it's like sweeping up and throwing it out the door, and then you have the powerful, life-changing dreams that are there to direct us and work through things. So included in that line, it's a big line, or we could even get it, let's just stick it there, is the shadow.
Yeah.
As we were discussing earlier. And these are parts of yourself that have tremendous power that you are not aware of. And often, as in the case with trauma, you split it off. And I mean, that's an incredible a tool to survival, right? If you're being raped or you're being attacked or something like that, you can split that off and put that aside, because you need to get the hell out of there and take care of yourself and, get this goon or something like that. You can't just freeze up. But at some point, you're talking to people, I don't feel anything. Okay, well, you do. And we have a mechanism that allows us to put these things in the basement. We can lock them up. And the more unpleasant and the more awful they are, and the more contrary to our own ethics, the more we'll keep them in there. But the problem is shadow does not go away. It just starts controlling things from the basement, and it's coming up in the living room and in the bathroom and the front yard. And I think a lot of one of the causal aspects of addiction is unprocessed shadow.
You bet.
And that you're trying to keep that down. You don't want to feel it. You want to numb it. And that can be a big cause. So exploring the shadow and becoming aware of it. It's like, oh, wow, this is like controlling my life.
Yeah.
So even the intellectual realization of shadow work is good. See, the mind is good. And, but there's often also a kinesthetic bodily release that has to happen, but you really kind of need both. And they might not happen at the same time, but even if you started to get aware of it intellectually, that's a step in the right direction. But don't think that you're done yet. Now you know where to go. And I know you know lots about this stuff. So what would you like to?
Oh my gosh. Well, again, it's just colossal. Just a couple of things, because this alone is a conversation in itself. But the relationship of shadow work to the overarching notion of projection, and how it is that we're always, in fact, I think it was Ken who said in Spectrum of Consciousness, his first book, an amazing line, when a situation affects you more than it informs you, which happens all the time, you're probably dealing with a projection. And so you just put that on your forehead or on your fridge. And is that a humbling revelation or what? I am projecting all the time. And shadow work just worked with it in particular bandwidth. But just to keep it somewhat contained, say just a teeny bit again about, not again, but introduce the 3-2-1 shadow working method. Because it's like, okay, well, that sounds great, but what do I do with it? And so the 3-2-1 method is brilliant. So simple, may not be easy, but brilliant. So maybe just a little bit about that, so people can say, oh, now I can work with re-owning these projections.
Yeah, and if you find yourself reacting more than is an average sane person would think is an emotional reaction, like somebody bumps into you in line and you punch them, that's some shadow stuff there for sure, or your kid just drops gravy and mashed potatoes in his lap, instead of just I love you, son. You know, you go nuts. So the shadow is always there, and it pops out and can cause great harm. But the 3-2-1 shadow work I took in, I talked about in my book. I created this one. They were doing something at the Integral Institute that was,
Oh,
and I thought I knew I was hitting, so I invented my own one. And then I found out it wasn't anything like Diane Hamilton was doing. So it was, but it seemed to work. And so we're using brain entrainment technology because it takes us into these lower, more receptive states. Theta is a good one for dreams and these images and all this stuff to work out. So let's see. Okay, I'll work myself here. Okay, is John despairing, hopeless John? That's when I'm depressed. That's what I am. So I'm looking at this image, and it could be, you know, an animal, everything. In my case, it's just me, and I'm just like, so I'm just looking at it. Like, John feels so depressed, so hopeless. Wow, look how he holds his body. Look, you know, it's just and so you just kind of feel into that third person, looking as that shadow part of yourself, that lost part of my soul, as other. Okay. And then, as you know, you continue the brain entrainment, and you, okay, and you can ask for help. By the way, I think there are powers in the universe that are us and are available to us. It's like, okay, thanks God, help me with this next step. And
so
then,
so John, that's 3. Just so we articulate with people, what you just mentioned is 3.
that was or 3. That's a third person. My shadow's part as other than me. I'm looking at it as an object outside of myself. Second person is when I start conversing with this shadow X, myself, and I give it a name. Lost, despairing John. How are you doing? Not good. What are you feeling? Well, like my name, I feel lost and despairing and hopeless, and that my life has been just a mess. I've never really done anything that matters. I don't feel like I have anything I can contribute. I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. And, you know, okay, thank you. Yeah. And what else? And, you know, this and that. And so I just let him do that. And at the same time as the other person in the conversation, I'm starting to kind of feel what lost, despairing, hopeless John is feeling. I'm starting to enter into my own body. Okay. And then I'll, you know, just, I'm my own therapist. So is there anything else that I need to hear that you need to tell me? I just feel lonely. Okay, so you feel lonely. All right. I get it. Thank you, lost, despairing John. So look, now, lost, despairing John, I want you to come home, brother. You take him and you bring this portion of yourself that you were talking to in this conversation, and you just completely own it. You know, this is my lost, despairing, hopeless self. And you feel it in your body, and you just stay with it. And you one of the things I said, thank you, teacher, you know, because I know it's there to teach me. And sometimes it begins to shift quite easily. Sometimes it shifts just a little bit. But even if it's a bit of a shift, afterwards, you're going to feel that something is useful has been done. There's a little more energy. And other times you can just, you know, the feeling, usually it's around the heart where I get a lot of my stuff, you know, and solar plexus maybe. And it just tightens up and gets stronger. And I breathe into it. My wife said she used to see me like sitting up in bed doing this work, and I would just be, my whole body would be trembling. Like she knew I was going through something heavy. And then it begins to lift, and it's like the fog, you know, foggy morning, you can't see anything. And then you start to see a little bit of light coming through the fog, and you go, nah, I'm just projecting. That's not real light. Then, oh yeah, it gets brighter, and this thing gently lifts. And then you, you know, you get through it. And this is something you can do with different aspects of yourself. I mean, the human soul, look what we're going through as a human family, you could do that kind of work. But when you do that, you're lighter, you're a bit happier. It's if some of this energy that's been locked up in my deep despairing self has been released, and that can be released to reach out to others, to play music, to be good to my dog, whatever it is. There's more psychic, spiritual, emotional energy available to me. And if I don't deal with that stuff that we hide in the shadows is gonna wreck our lives. And it can cause physical disease, emotional disease, relational issues, professional issues, on, and needs to be confronted. And that's one of the brilliant things about Ken's model, is he would not leave the shadow out, because this whole beautiful thing, if the shadow is not accounted for and honored and given a chance to express itself in a way that doesn't hurt yourself or anybody else, the whole thing just can not work, collapse.
That's one of the best summations of the 3-2-1 process that I've ever heard, John. It's terrific. And one thing that immediately came to mind is it's like, what did James Joyce once say? Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. What came to my mind here is when we have really intense experiences, right? There's something going on, especially if we can't contain it, our hearts, minds aren't big enough. Something in us that says, I'm out of here, right? And so what do? We project out of here. And when we project out of here, it's not 3-2-1, it's 1-2-3. The experience is too intense. So it's like, I'm out of here. So we throw it out and again, plaster it onto others. And that's why we're affected by others, because now they have what we're repressing, right? I'm not a jerk. I'm not angry. That person's angry, right? It's brilliant. It's like, it's almost mathematical. And so what I haven't thought about this before. Basically, 1-2-3 is an out-of-body experience. 3-2-1 is a back into body experience. And then this is where the right view, and it takes a little bit of courage, because what does it entail? You have to return to the beasts from the basement. You have to return to that experiential intensity that you weren't able to digest and metabolize to begin with. And therefore, if you don't have the right view, you're going to FedEx yet again. If you have the right view, here again, everything we're talking about today, right view, you take the out-of-body experience, which leads to a disingenuine life. Now 3-2-1 is I am going back to body. I'm going back to life. And then when that emotion, you return to it, you now have the structure. I'm going to stay, like Suzuki Roshi said, don't be a smoky bonfire, be a good bonfire. Cremate your experience as you live it. We like to smoke. We like to project. So 3-2-1, I hadn't thought of this before. 3-2-1 is a return. It's a re-embodiment experience back into ownership of the feeling. And then the practice is to stay with that, because like we talked about earlier, it's a state. It will self-liberate. If you have the capacity to just be there, let the fire have its way, Dr. John, and it will liberate. But for most people who don't have the capacity, what do? They hit the eject button. They project, they're out of themselves, I'm out of here. The whole shadow thing starts. And this goes, again, way beyond what we can talk about here. But you take this even deeper, John, to the fundamental phenomenology of projection altogether. I would argue that this is what creates the sense of externality, period. Yeah. The very sense that there's an other is based on this phenomenological process. And so we don't have time to go into that, but this is another iteration of that profound kind of approach. And so thank you for this level of insight. I hadn't clicked on this before. Well,
that was well said, Andrew. You said a lot. That was really good. And then just one little last thing is that ability to dissociate is a short-term survival skill.
Exactly.
If you're in an emergency situation, you just can't collapse and start hugging yourself and on the ground. You've got to save somebody. You've got to save yourself. You got to move, but you got to go back and you have to process that. Put that in the bonfire. And I mean, I can see evolutionarily why that was necessary, but if we don't go back and deal with things, problems.
Exactly. And then just briefly for my listeners, in Hindu Buddhist language, again, a little bit outside of what we can talk about here, but this is where the samskaras are born. This is right here what we're talking about with John, and that profound descriptive tool from the Eastern wisdom traditions. This is the genesis of the samskaras. that basically form us. I mean, the samskaras are basically what form us. And fundamentally, these drivers are there creating, bringing, this formless awareness into form based on these profound habitual patterns. So I better pause because otherwise we're going to go up. This is such a great set of topics, John, but what a wonderful overview. Now we've really pinged it, these amazing contributions from the integral approach. And now maybe listeners can say, okay, now I'm starting to see, whoa, not only does this apply to the recovery project in this more colloquial sense, but is in a direction I want to take it right after we talk about brainwave entrainment, because I want to get there first. I want to go just even a tad bit deeper to talk about some of the fundamental principles behind everything we're talking about. But before we go there, let's circle back. I sent this out about 45 minutes ago. Talk to us about the role in your experience of brainwave entrainment, how it works, the promise and peril, if there is, of this approach. And then, basically how it's played out in your life and also with working with others.
Okay. Well, in the 12 steps, step 11 says, sought through prayer and meditation to increase our conscious contact with God, seeking only his will and the power to carry it out. So right there in the 12 steps, I say, you better be doing prayer and meditation. And I don't think, I mean, I've been to a lot of, I know a lot of people that are working the steps. I've been a lot of meetings, and basically prayer is generally kind of a petitionary thing. Mm-hmm. Lord, thank you for keeping us sober today and help me to stay sober the rest of the day. And, and it's like good. There's nothing wrong with, honoring that and reminding yourself and reminding God of it. Reminding, I don't think he does. But the deep interior transformational prayer and meditation is what step 11 was getting at, because it's those interior places is where we find our despair, but we also where we find our light, we find our higher power, and we find our connection to all things. So that is very important. However, if you're trying to teach meditation to a bunch of addicts and alcoholics that just, first few days of not having booze or drugs, and you try to sit there and have them watch their breath, they go crazy. I found it was a little easier in the wilderness, but still it was very hard. And so when I discovered this technology many years ago now, I first of all, I had this huge awakening, enlightenment, class 5 mystical spiritual experience. And I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful. And am I enlightened? It took about a half hour. And the answer is no and no, but it was a powerful experience that has stayed with me and kind of gave me the spaciousness to go back and deal with a lot of my demons that were keeping me depressed and were keeping me barely in the game of life. So after that, it seemed I could just open up and let what would come up. And it took me about 6 months, I think, to get through the really core stuff. But I knew because of that first experience that I was getting well, because it would come up and then like my body would, shake, or I'd feel this pain. And it's like, part of you go, the hell with this. But I knew there was some angel of my better nature that was whispering in my ear, and this is exactly where you need to go, brother. So it really helped me. And of course, wow, man, maybe I could use these with my my students, the people I'm trying to help. What a big step forward. So that's when I started using it. And there's not too much negative. I don't know if it works well or is indicated for people who are schizophrenic. Mm-hmm. I've never seen it seem to help at all. But that is an area that I know very, very little about, so I shouldn't be. But for your run-of-the-mill depressive and addicts and even bipolar, which is one of the more difficult things to deal with, it time and time again, people have reported that it's really helped. And I had a version of bipolar. It wasn't the classic one, but it was like I'd be up in the morning, and then the darkness would hit around noon and last till the sun went down. It was brutal, but it helped me. And I never, I didn't think I was, the Messiah, or, spin off in any of these stuff that sometimes happen in more classic bipolar stuff, but it seems to really help with that too. And, in bipolar, it seems that the pressure builds up inside until it blows up and you do all this stuff. Well, if you can keep the pressure down and keep it regulated through an interior practice, it seems to do a lot of good. At least that's how I've seen it in the people that I've worked with and in my own experience. So, I said, man, this is step 11 on steroids. And I went, maybe that's not the appropriate way to say, this is a drug problem. Anyway, so, and sure enough, it turned out that it was a great aid. And not only that, we're giving people a practice they could take with them. You have your temple in your smartphone, and you have your tracks, and so you can use it when you're going to work. Or I recommend for all human beings that they meditate and use this stuff early in the morning, before you check your emails and the local news and blah 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 blah. It's just like spend that time, coming together and getting yourself spiritually aligned. And for me in my practice right now, I've been doing this for God knows how many years, a lot. That prayer and meditation have kind of become the same thing, and that meditation is my preparation for prayer. That helps me to slow down and stop the incessant chatter, then you just start looking at the chatter. Well, there it is again. So you have a little distance. Instead of being your thoughts, you're watching your thoughts, and then after a while they come down and you can have stillness. And at that point it's like, okay, Spirit, God, I'm ready. I'm just going to shut up now. Seriously, I'll shut up. He said, yes, John. Anyway, and if you need to tell me anything or heal anything, I need to let go or do anything, and anything I left out, this is your time. I'll shut up now. Yes, John. Okay. And then I do it. So that has really, 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 really been a great help. And the fact that I can contact, God, and I don't know God's a lot of problems with that word and everything, but I say it now, because, and I went through problems with that for years, but that higher power, whatever you want to call it, spirit, great mystery, inside of us is hugely comforting.
Yeah.
Because, no matter what, it's always right there. And Rumi said, God is closer to you than an eyelash on your eyeball.
Yeah. Than you are to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So John, talk to us a little bit about, many of my listeners will be new to this. How many varieties are there of brainwave entrainment? I mean, are they like prescriptively given out based on people's predispositions and all the things we just talked about? Or is it kind of a one size fits all practice? And how would one get into this, explore it safely, properly, and then kind of the mechanistic.
Well, basically what happened, they started figuring this out back in the 70s, that meditators were actually changing their brainwave states through their practices, their discipline. So they would hook up, swamis and nuns and monks and, people that meditated all the time. And they would go, okay, it's happening. I'm going in, and they could see that they were taking their brains down into alpha or theta or delta or something. And it's like, wow, we thought this was all just mumbo jumbo. Right. So that was a big step forward. And then back in the 70s, it's in my book, read the book, the doctor that discovered that you could take two sounds, one in this ear, one in that ear, and by balancing those, say 100 and 150, it would split the difference of whatever that was, and train your brain to the difference. At least that's how we understood it at the time. So, and this is stuff you can use it, and whatever technology you hook it up to will affirm. And there's a great research paper that was done. It was part of her doctorate degree. It's on our app, where she reviewed all the latest studies, which have been peer reviewed, etc., and they couldn't be over 3 years old. So I don't know why research is bad after 4 years, but anyway, and she found all of these things, and when it didn't work, seemed to be the problem is you didn't do it long enough. So it takes probably about 8 to 10 minutes to really have that shift happen. And I think if you use them a lot and you're really clear, you can work with it. It doesn't take that long, but it takes a while. And there's different brainwave states. We talk at beta, which is like, run around the world and multitask and all this stuff. It's pretty fast brainwave. Under that is alpha. And for years, everybody thought that was like the ideal, the meditative brainwave, that you wanted to get to. And it's a little slower, and you can come really focused. And, when you're in the Lord of the Rings reading the book and you're just there in Middle Earth, your brain's probably doing a lot of alpha, right? Because you're just there. And under that is theta. And that's where the dream world comes in, and the rapid eye movement and this visions and dreams and our unconscious material, kind of the unconscious and conscious come together, and can be very fruitful for as a meditative practice. Under that, delta, and that is even slower. Think of waves in an ocean. Big waves have a lot of power, and it takes you down to a really deep level where you can do the work. I mean, these things are tools to get us in the space where we can do the spiritual work. They really help. And as with my students before this technology, they just couldn't get it. And their minds were, I'm not going inside. What a wreck that is. And Ken Wilber, he said one time it took him 5 years of meditating 2 hours a day to start feeling the difference. I was like, God, is that heroic or what? No way I could have stayed that long. So as mentioned, I had a big thing right at the beginning, which was kind of often if you're going to be an initiator, it seems the universe will give you a very powerful experience, so you can go and help other people. So and then under that is epsilon.
Yep.
Even slower. And God, there is one more that is
Omicron. Is it Omicron? Is it Omicron? I can't remember. I knew no epsilon, and then there's gamma on the other end. But anyway,
the only one of it. Look for let's see, infinity is the name of the track, and it actually goes there, and it's kind of like delta wrapped in a gamma burrito. That's how it's. So
that's
it's
awesome.
Really, and then there is gamma, which is like way over here,
4200. Yeah,
really intense. And they started seeing it first significantly in the brains of Buddhist monks who were doing compassion meditations. So it seems to be good for compassion, but it also really helps you process lots of stuff quickly and effectively. And so, that's good to keep your mind in shape if you're writing a book, all that. However, that's the one you probably don't want to do more than, 3 times a week, because it's a big, it can be really stimulating. And, doing these tracks, and it's, again, I mentioned this earlier, it's like half science and half art. So we have these great creators that make this, and some of it's music, some of it's sounds of the ocean, nature sound, some mix thereof, and sometimes you would train the brain to several different brainwaves at the same time, depending on what it is. And if you go wherever you get your apps, just put in "I Awake" and it'll come up, and that's our app, and you can look through it and see all the different tracks. There's a whole bunch of them now, and you push the button on it and it'll tell you what they're for, if there's a guided meditation, what brainwave states are used, and what it's recommended to do. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ones. And I think it seems to me it's like when you go to the gym, you want to change up your workout practice every once in a while, because your body gets just used to it and adapts to it. So if you want to grow and change, you keep adding these things. And I do it pretty much intuitively at this point. I said, God, what do you want me to listen to today? And then ding, something probably will come up, and I'll work with one track for a while. And then when I feel it's time to move on to something else, I do.
Really just wonderful. It's really a kind of a technological downshifting, isn't it? I mean, you're basically going down and fundamentally hitting neutral, and then dropping all the way below that into the states that are associated with Turiya, Dharmakaya, and Eastern language.
And it's good for not just the traditional things that meditators want. It's like finding God or finding emptiness or whatever that is, whatever state, the tradition says. but it's good for just thinking sometimes. If you have issues you got to deal with, like, it looks like I'm headed for a divorce. Am I supposed to do this? You know, is there anything I can do? Or is this just, you know, you get down and you can kind of just ask the questions and the answers will begin to kind of materialize. It's also very good for creativity.
Yeah.
And I haven't had writer's block in a long, long time. And I do a lot of writing with all the things that I do. And it just really comes through. And here's an interesting tale. I started becoming very involved in supporting Ukraine and my friends over there and raising money and tried to do everything I could, because it's just such a horrible, horrible thing that's going on over there.
Yeah.
These people,
Yeah.
they're completely innocent. They didn't do anything to deserve this invasion. It's just Putin wants this big empire, and he's willing to kill as many people as it takes to get it for him. So I've been a musician, as I told you before we turned on the video, and I used to write a lot of songs, but I hadn't done it in years. And I wanted to write something that would help me express all these emotions, you know, my anger, my admiration, all of this stuff around this Ukrainian invasion situation. And if you go to Apple Music or Spotify or CD Baby, but go to either one of those and just put my name, John Dupuy. I'm the only John Dupuy ever wrote a song. It'll come up there, Ukraine, and you can listen to this song. And that was, I definitely, you know, credit where credit's due to the practice and kind of trusting the creative interior development. And I couldn't remember how I'd written songs years ago. I'd written some pretty good ones. And I wrote this one, and I still don't know quite how I did it. It's just the chorus came, and then it took a while for that. Just A minor, Ukraine, A minor, Ukraine came through, and then got a melody for the verses, and the verses came out really, really easy. Were all the things that I've been hearing from my friends in Ukraine and on the news and all this stuff. And I put it together in a way that my Ukrainian friends love it, you know, because it really honors them and what they're doing. So go check that out. And that's a product, I think, of this integral practice that I engage in.
That's fantastic. I'll definitely check it out. We'll also provide commentary link to it as well. But so briefly on this, how do you respond? From my own experience, when I first heard about this, I realized how traditional ossified I became as a kind of a classical practitioner, meditator. And my first response that eventually I looked back and realized how proprietary it was cheating, right? Cheating. So when I can't take this with me, right? I can't take this when I die. I can't take this into the whatever. So how do you respond, or do you? Does it mean anything to you when people say, this is just the Western silver bullet quick fix to enter these states, which sometimes can actually be samadhi states. I mean, you can enter really profound states of absorption. And so how do you respond to the Western critique or the Eastern critique is like, this is just cheating, right?
Well, it's not addiction, first of all. Okay. So you don't have to worry about that. I gotta listen to my, profound meditation program. No, it's not like that. And I think, basically the ultimate understanding of enlightenment is there is only God, and thou art that. Okay, and I left off the story to get to that, but there it is. So this is obviously a product of God also. So if the universe is creating tools for us, because we live in these highly stressful times, we're being bombarded by stimulation and information and everything that's going on. There's so many of us now, and there's the tension between the free countries and the dictatorships and oil, the whole meta crisis. We could use some help. And I think this is also God. And if you just handle like that with gratitude and humility, it's great. But if you're, and if you don't want to do it, then don't do it, for crying out loud. But, maybe give it a shot, see if it helps.
And again, returning it, it's another wonderful application of the integral, in this case, upper left, upper right, right? I mean, you're basically engaging the integral approach.
Yes, and it is changing your brain materially. I mean, you could see the changes in meditators. They had the frontal part of the brain is really developed, and there's all these things going on. So also I find, because I've been doing this for years, I can go and just, go to church or go to a Zen temple or whatever, and just go into really deep meditation really easily without the technology because my brain has been worked and trained. It's really nice. I love to go to church now, whatever brand. I mean, I'm sure there's some I wouldn't enjoy, but I can just get into a state of prayer and praise. And I have some stories about that. But anyway, I'll spare you. But yeah, it lasts. It's not just, dependent on the technology. Once you train your brain, and if you want to start trying to do traditional, at a certain point, your inner sage will start squaring you away and telling you what you need to do and everything. So don't be too judgmental, but work with it.
It's another principle, and I hadn't thought about this before. It's another instance, or in our conversation, first instance of the principles of neuroplasticity, where basically you tend to have this top-down thing. Oh, what I do with my mind changes my brain. Well, this is a bidirectional process. Neuroplasticity works both ways. So now you're working with your brain. Guess what? Now it's bottom up. Works up, changes the mind. And so to me, it's like, whoa, now like this isn't cheating. This is just contemporary spirituality. And I love what you said about this is yet another manifestation of spirit or God. It's like why would you somehow carton this off and say, that's not part of it? So that's a wonderful also interjection, right? So yeah, super. And I also will share with my listeners that John graciously will have it added to the end of this podcast, has graciously offered to give us a sample of this IOA technology. And so
let me say a little bit about this one. It's called Deep Recovery is the name of it. Yeah. And it has Lee Spusta, and I actually created this even before IOA. It was my first experimentation at this, and I wanted tracks to help my students' addiction, and so I'd never done a guided meditation, so I got 5 books on guided meditations, and I was getting ready to read them, and then finally I just put on the headphones, listening to Lee's very, very powerful entrainment sounds, and this channel, the whole thing just came right out. And 5 books in here, all I had to do is shut up and sit down and write it down. And I think it's a very spiritual, loving, whether you're an addict or not, there's things that are being processed there that every human being needs to do. And if you don't want to listen to the guided part, there's another track where it's just the music itself, which is it's a brilliant a bit of entrainment and can really help. And remember, this stuff is not the magic bullet. It doesn't do the job. It's just a tool to facilitate, a very difficult journey and give you, 25%, better chance of getting there, which is enormous, but you still have to show up. You still have to do your part. You still have to develop a practice. And just think of all the energy and the money and just all the hurt and stuff that got you to the point in your addiction that you're in a treatment center. And, if you put like a third of that into getting better, you'd probably do pretty well. So it's gonna take some time, and it teaches you discipline, and it's a great tool. And you learn how to meditate using it. And sometimes you'll find maybe the traditional way you learn, which is really great. By the way, if you're trained in a tradition, people say that really helps them. It doesn't negate. Yep. Your brain has already made that kind of advancement through your years of practice, and it meets you where you're at, and you can go on from there. So our interiors are infinite, and these help us explore them and come back hopefully better, more useful, more compassionate, wiser people.
Fantastic. I can't wait to share it. So if you have just a teeny bit more energy, I wanted to go to the one last thing that I really wanted to address your way. And sure. I want to preface this with a couple personal stories and also my view on this, and just see how this lands with you. In Buddhist cosmology, let me start with my story. So when I did my 3-year retreat over 20 years ago, for the first 2 months, John, it was hands down the most difficult experience of my life. I mean, I was walled off in a compound, completely walled off from the world, no contact. One day a week, we got some mail. That was it, some food. I was in a retreat center. I was in my little room, the size of a closet. And then I was in a little literally meditation box, which everybody goes, well, that's interesting. I mean, I slept in it. I spent basically 18 hours, 19 hours a day in this box, which I playfully came to call ego's coffin, right? So I was just like basically in a straitjacket. And what became one of the most insightful, painful experiences of my life that I want to use as a platform was this. I felt like I was in battery acid. It was like unbelievably difficult for me. And after, like a month of this, I started to like, why is this so hard? And then what came to my mind in a series of insights was I realized, again, I've never been a formal substance abuser, but I'm going to talk to you about now how I am a substance abuser. I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in detox. I'm going, and what I'm feeling here is my withdrawal from samsara. And then I thought about it. I said, wait a second. Okay, here I am. I basically can't move. It's like savasana forever. I'm basically corpse pose, right? I can't move. And what I realized is like, oh my gosh, this is removing me from the substance to which I am addicted, which is movement. And interestingly enough, in tantric language, thought is actually defined as movement of mind. And so that's when I realized, oh my gosh, I am a thought junkie. I am a movement junkie. And movement is also the word that's connected to karma. Lay literally means action. I'm addicted to movement, to action. And so then I realized, oh my gosh, I am in a freaking detox center here. And it really felt like it. I mean, I was really hurting. And so then, I started to put all the stuff together, and this is what I want to throw you away. In Buddhist cosmology, we live literally, there are three realms: the formless realm, the realm of form, and the realm of desire, passion. We live in the realm of desire. And desire is basically what moves us. And so in stronger terms, we live in the realm of addiction, desire gone bad. And so then I started to put all this stuff together. It's like, hey, wait a second. I am an addict. We're all addicts. It's just a matter of degree and what we're addicted to. I'm addicted to this crap back here. I'm an intellectual junkie. I'm addicted to ideologies and thought. I'm a spiritual junkie. I have all these things that, like, hey man, I may not be a substance abuser in that sense, but I abuse the substance of thought. I abuse these other forms, basically. So it's the abuse of form, right? And so I realize now that the entire spiritual path, sometimes in stronger language, it's called death in slow motion. Well, it's detox in slow motion. It's a way to remove our addiction to samsara, our addiction to thought, our addiction to whatever. And again, whoa, is this helpful in terms of me relating to other people? It's just a matter of degree. Everybody has this potentiality for addiction. I see another as what I'm blind to myself. And so when I was in retreat, it's like, holy crap, I am just as addicted to my movement, to my action, to my thought, as these other people are to their forms of substance abuse. And so therefore, I wanted to throw that your way and then talk about, and then I'll pause for a second because I get so excited about this, is talk about this kind of healthy reductionism, where basically if we apply the principles of reductionism properly, it's not a bad thing. It's a level of articulation, simplifying in the best sense. And so then where I'm going with this is, like I mentioned almost 2 hours ago, to me, I find it incredibly insightful to study the iteration of addiction in the ways that you're writing about, but now going really integral, talking about like sobriety principle. What does it mean to really recover from samsara? What is intoxication principle? How do these things actually apply at iterative levels all the way up and down the food chain, leading even into psycho-spiritual levels of this phenomenology? And so I personally find when I read your book, I go, oh my God, this is exactly the stuff that I'm addicted to. It's just a different form of substance abuse. So I wanted to pause there. I have more to say, but that's a shot across the bow in terms of what I wanted to turn to before we start to close here. Maybe I wouldn't say bringing it up, but talking about it at this particular level of experience.
Wow. Let me just say, you're a brave man, Andrew. You and your little box. My God, that's a deep bow. That's great. And I was just thinking that was Buddhist technology. That little box. They didn't have this stuff, so they put you in a box. Yeah. Awake's not that hard, but Anyway, wow. I'm glad you stuck with it. So what does it mean to be sober? Is that the question?
Yeah, what does it mean to be sober? what does it mean to be intoxicated at all these other levels? Because I would say, again, playfully, but also somewhat gallows humor, we're all living under the influence.
Sure.
In this case, we're living under the influence of ignorance and as byproduct of reification and everything else. And so to me, it's like, hey, we can take this particular self-similar fractal iteration of this process and extend it up and down the ladder to realize, wait a second, exactly what we're talking about here has a vast level of descriptive and prescriptive applicability to what we're doing on psychospiritual levels, completely irrespective. I wouldn't say completely, but I think you get where I'm coming from. In addition to augmentation of everything we talk about and that you write about so beautifully in terms of traditional instances of sobriety, intoxication, and all those principles.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. It's kind of like saying, well, what does it mean to be enlightened?
You got it.
You know, on and on and on and on. We've been batting that one around for oh God, for thousands of years. And I've been reading A.H. Alma's recently, and he's about as good as it gets on that. His latest books, we were able to interview him, and he's asked to come back again. I'm excited about that.
He's a rock star, totally.
But first of all, being sober means being honest, you know, and this is, of course, this is all progressive and developmental, but the first thing, you just gotta be honest. I am a drunk, and this is my 6th rehab. And I think every time it's going to be different when I start using, and it's not different, it gets worse. So yeah. And some people, that son of a bitch over there can sit there and drink 2 or 3 glasses of wine and get up and have a life the next day. I can't do that. And during this addiction, I became completely self-absorbed. Nobody or anything mattered. I didn't even matter. Just getting high and staving off the fear of withdrawals. That's all. So when somebody's in recovery, and this, you know, this, it's not just you click the, you know, the switch and you're recovered, but there's a deep integrity and honesty there that I find, and they realize that it's one day at a time. It's true. And if you fall off that wagon, you're gonna fall off. So that and it's kind of, the disease forces you to get honest, because you have to be honest about yourself. And if you start lying to others or lying to yourself, it just builds. And you know, it's in that addict voice again, that nasty wolf we talked about, you know, begins to take over. You're feeding it. So real honesty and the realization that this disease was soul destroying. I'm talking about soul. That's the deepest part of the individual human, where kind of the all and us, I meet, big I, little I. And I was a selfish asshole, and I hurt people. I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm going to go to the damn meeting, even though I don't want to go. You know, I know everything. They want to go. One time a guy was saying this, says, well, did you ever think there might be somebody there that needs you to listen to them? Okay, I'm going, John. You know, so there is there's a humility, a self-recognition, honesty, compassion begins to emerge, right? And of course, the last step in 12 steps is giving back and helping other alcoholics. It was originally written for alcoholics. It's expanded to just about everything now. But they're that path of service, and that my staying sober and on this path means I can't be a selfish asshole anymore. God, would that be nice? But I just can't do that and survive, because I've been wounded in such a way that if I don't, you know, be of service, I'm going to lose my connection with God as I understand him or her, and I'm going to get lost in the hell and the fog of addiction again. So there's, you know, it's like you go there and the first thing they say is, well, just help arrange the chairs. Okay. And that's the first step. You're doing something for other people. And yeah, and that just progresses. And then, you know, when you still do your life, but there's always knowing that you're living kind of in a state of grace, because you didn't use today, because you know, they say your worst day sober is like much better than your best day when you were in the throes of your disease. So, and it helps. That's why it helps to have meetings. You hear that people tell their stories. Oh God, yes, I remember that, you know. And of course, you're there to listen, open your heart, and say, okay, brother, there's hope, and you can sponsor others. So there's honesty, service, a spiritual center to your life. And at some point, people say they say this, that there's gratitude that this happened to you, because otherwise you would have never had to do the stuff you did in order to get you to that place of compassion and service and gratitude and this, you know, the spiritual center of your life and the recognition of higher power. And is that an answer?
That's beautiful. No, I mean, yeah, just want to give you a hug, man. It's like that's just awesome. Just awesome. Well, John, I could talk to you all day, man. I mean, this is like so rich. I want to respect your time. So we start to close up here, my friend. Any question I didn't ask? Anything that you want to share before we start to wind it up?
Yeah, just remember to get the free I Awake track that we're giving out, and you can share that with whoever you want. You know, you're not gonna get busted for copyright things. Just don't sell it, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
But give it to people and use it of service. And yeah, to just use the track and know if you're struggling, there is hope. Millions of people have come through this hell, but millions of us are also dying. And how that feeds into, you know, the meta crisis, it's a big part. And thank you for inviting me here and letting us talk about all this stuff. And it's my prayer that this will be useful. And you know,
It's been incredibly rich.
Yeah,
I've learned so much. What are you currently working on? Maybe say a couple of words about this amazing podcast that you do with Roger. That's like off the charts. What else are you currently working on? Other ways that people can know about your work and support you in your own ventures?
Well, I'm after I wrote this Ukraine song, it's like, oh, I'm a songwriter, you know, I can do this. So I'm recording another album, and I think I'm going to just release them individually, the songs. I don't think I'll charge from, I don't know, I haven't worked out, let's just get it out there in the world. But, and this is bringing up a good point we didn't mention, but if you are a creative person, or you have a gift to give that you're not giving and that you're not working on and facilitating and getting better at, that's going to cause problems inside. You're going to get cynical and despairing. And if you're you know, it could cause relapse if you're an alcoholic, and if you're not an addict. We all have our issues, but that's not good. You've got to give your gifts. And one of the highest forms of a state of human experience is when we feel the wisdom coming through us, as if we're a channel, and just we're getting out of the way, and God's just, you know, sending his love and wisdom out to the world. That's
spot on. That's spot on. Well, John, this has been really, you're in the spirit of integral. You are one integral mofo, man. I mean, like on one level, you're speaking from the divinity, from the heavens, and on one level, you're street smarts. You're speaking from the level of the earth, and so your capacity to join heaven and earth, you actually are living embodiment of the integral principles altogether, and we're all beneficiaries of your work. So it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know you, to read your work, study it, actually to hang out with you here for the last little bit. You're doing some amazing things, and thank you so much for your time and energy, and let's perhaps consider doing it again at some point. It's been so rich.
wonderful. Thank you. God bless.
Take care.